In today's episode, we're going to talk about the pros and cons of podcasting. All right, guys, welcome back to Entrepreneur Hour Podcast and Entrepreneur Hour TV. Before we get started, make sure to give us a like and a subscribe below. Share this with a friend, share it on social media. Help us out, get the word out about the amazing stuff we do here to help entrepreneurs grow, break through, and become superhuman entrepreneurs. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into this. There's a podcasting, I get this all the time, right? I've been doing my podcast for some time now, and so I get a lot of questions about like, should I start a podcast? Or, how do I start a podcast? I think there's a lot of misconceptions. It's super easy to start a podcast, and at this point I could literally probably launch a show in like 15 minutes. So we're going to talk about some of the things that you need to think about before you actually go through the technical specifics of how to start a show. I think most people ask about the technical stuff, and I do talk about that. I'm going to link a blog below where I give you like the skinny, right? Everything you need to know about how to get your podcast off the ground and how to do it the right way. But let's go ahead and jump into it today. First, let's talk about the pros. So the number one pro is, for me, it's been a massive credibility builder, right? So my brand has been greatly enhanced, right? At least the perception of my brand has been greatly enhanced, and it's basically been through my podcast. I think there's so many people on the internet now that are giving out advice and telling you to do this and telling you to do that and all these various things. And having a platform like a podcast, I don't know why it's perceived differently than YouTube, but when you tell somebody you have a YouTube channel, you tell somebody you have a podcast, like, you have a podcast, right? So there's this perception that someone has to ask you to do a podcast, or you have to like somehow pass some kind of test, right, to be approved. Whereas I think YouTube, it was built upon like broadcast yourself, right? And so I think we just think anybody can throw a video on YouTube, right? So there's a little bit of element of prestige there that comes with a podcast. And for me, and kind of using it in that standpoint, I've been able to have some amazing guests come on my show, right? Damon John, Barbara Corcoran, Grant Cardone, Marie Forleo, Ryan Dice, Dave Asprey, Dr. Josh Axe. I mean, Jeff Hoffman, the billionaire founder of Priceline, multiple New York Times best-selling authors, Guy Kawasaki. I mean, guys that I read their books, and never in my wildest dreams did I think that I would be friends with these people, let alone have them, or having my podcast, let alone be friends with these people on top of that, right? So in that standpoint, those people, through affiliation, I've been able to level up my brand. And I think I don't know what the difference is, but that's just a more common platform in terms of interviews to have somebody come be a guest on your show. So it's an easier ask for not only the guest, but also for yourself too, right? Having someone come on your YouTube channel, like, you have to coordinate logistics, and maybe they don't feel comfortable being on camera because you might repurpose that in some way that's not advantageous to them. So from my perspective, just in terms of the perception of podcasting, but also the ways that I've used podcasting to have those big guests on my show, it has really been a massive credibility booster, and it has honestly been the probably the number one driver of how people perceive my online brand. All right, number two, it's super easy to get started, right? Video's tough. I can tell you, when I set up to do one of these, it takes me much longer. I mean, I've got a good system in place now for video, but you got to worry about lighting. You got to worry about what you're wearing. You got to worry about how your hair looks. You got stuff on your face. If one of sometimes my B-roll, right, the one you're looking at, this one, sometimes it runs out of storage, right, because I use that one on my phone, or even my DSLR, and only lasts 29 minutes. It cuts off at 30 minutes because it's technically not supposed to be used for that capacity, right? So there's all these other things, not to mention the fact that you might just not be comfortable on camera. So it's easy to just, hey, get a microphone. You can pick up like one of the Audio-Technica mics for like $50. Come home, sit in your closet, have great acoustics. That's a hack, by the way. Little pro tip there. Go to your closet. It's amazing acoustics. You're not going to have any reverb or any echoing or anything like that, because it blocks all that with all your clothing in there. It's a great place to record. I actually recorded my first few episodes in my closet, some of the best sounding episodes that I've ever done. So it's just easier to get started, right? You can just literally turn it on, plug it in, and record, right? If you have a USB mic, that's all you really need. All this other stuff that I have is really extra and stuff that I've added over time. What you see, right, is totally a luxury. It's not necessary at all. You can totally get started. And I think that's the big appeal to it. It's like, I have a lot of things that I want to share, and there's not a lot I have to do to get started with podcasting. I think that's a huge plus, and definitely something you should consider, but not necessarily the end-all, be-all in your decision. All right, number three is it's an amazing nurture tactic, and it's amazing network builder. So I already talked about the network building aspect, but I'm going to give you a couple examples of how it could work for you, right? Because not everybody's going to want to reach out and have a Damon John on their show, and that's totally fine. And probably in some cases isn't even feasible for you, or not going to really move the needle for you at all with your business, which ultimately should be your goal. But here's the deal. I've been added to several advisory boards. As an entrepreneur, there's people that, will reach out and they'll say, hey, I have this company and I'll see the upside, me personally, of, wow, this has a lot of potential, but maybe they're a little bit, tight on cash. They haven't raised any kind of institutional funding or anything like that. And so it makes sense for me, in some cases, not all, to join as an advisor. Most of those people reach out because they know I have an asset. I have a tool that I always call dynamite to concrete doors, right? So I can reach out to somebody and say, hey, I've had X, Y, and Z, some of the people that I've mentioned, that have come on my show. And most people, once they hear those names, it's a pretty easy yes. I would say my yes rate at this point to my no rate, in terms of me reaching out and inquiring about coming on my show, is probably somewhere around 85 to 90%. If they say no, I would say a good 5 to 10% of that is right now just doesn't work, reach back at some other point in time, right? And some people that is the case. It takes me several years and we finally get our schedules right and so on and so forth. But if I told you from a standpoint of, hey, I need to connect with this person and I don't know how to do it, if I told you that you could create an asset that gave you an 85 to 95% chance of getting a yes, at least to have a conversation with that person, what would you say? All right. So from a B2B standpoint, it is a power tool when it comes to networking. So I would highly, highly recommend that. Now, the first thing I mentioned was nurture tactic. So what does that mean? There are various strategies in terms of what drives CTR, right? What's going to drive people going to your website, right? Or people joining your email list, or people buying your product, or taking advantage of the services that you offer. It's my experience, and it's the experience of many people that I've talked to in the podcasting space, that it really just doesn't drive a lot of direct business. Doesn't mean that it doesn't drive business. It just means that it doesn't drive necessarily the direct business that something like YouTube does. Here's a big distinguishing factor. We're going to get into the cons in a minute. But most people, what they're doing when they listen to podcasts is not conducive to them taking action, right? So you're listening to this. If you're listening to the audio version of the podcast version of this, you might be doing things like walking your dog, doing your laundry, doing the dishes, exercising, driving to work. You're not in a situation where if I drop a link and say, check out my free download, even though it sounds interesting to you, by the time your day ends, you're not going to remember what my actual specific link was, nor are you going to come back to actually scroll and find it. So what you often sometimes do, and this is the worst thing about having affiliate sponsors in podcasting, is I'll say, hey, I recommend Uber. Uber sponsors my show, and I get paid a pretty decent amount for every person that even just signs up to drive. Whether they drive or not, I get like $50 to $75 just for you signing up to drive and going through the application. It's not an application, but you effectively get what I'm saying. Like you filling out the paperwork online to drive for Uber. It's like $50 to $75 a person. So if you don't take my specific link though, and you just go to Uber and sign up because you heard me talk about it, what most people don't realize is that I don't see a dollar of that. So I basically given them free marketing. So with YouTube, it's a little bit different because you're engaged with it in that very specific moment in a way that you're watching this, not necessarily just listening to it, and so you can just go look at the description below and you can grab my unique link and boom, you're done and you can sign up and I get my, and we've tested this too, by the way. We've talked about stuff on YouTube, or I've gone to other people's YouTube channels that have much larger audiences than I have. And I see direct sales immediately after. I can plug something for weeks and days, and I can literally pour my heart into it on the podcast. And it's not often, at least not with the same velocity of sales that we see. So from that standpoint, podcasting is more of a nurture tactic, which means what you're doing is you're warming people up. It's a good touch point. It establishes credibility. It moves them closer to the sale. But sometimes there's going to be another step that has to happen for them to eventually want to be a part of what you're doing, join an email list, so on and so forth. Okay, so the last big pro that I have here, and there's nothing wrong with nurture, by the way. Let me backtrack. There's nothing wrong with a nurture tactic. You need to have those touch points. So from that standpoint, it's an amazing nurture tactic. And also, while I'm on this topic, let me backtrack because I'm getting ahead of myself. Podcast retention rate is redonkulous. All right, so if you look at it side by side, our retention rate for YouTube, we're lucky if our average is like 3 to 5 minutes of watching a video. Podcast, I can do an hour long. The average is like well over 25 minutes. So people really engage. And again, let's go back to the activities that people are engaging with. If you're driving to work, I've got your undivided attention if you listen to my show, probably for 45 minutes or to an hour, or at least 20 minutes, right? And you're not going to bounce around. On YouTube, it's a little bit different. And this isn't a direct comparison between YouTube and podcasting. Let me be clear. I'm just giving you some semblance of how to I think for a lot of people, that's the decision. Should I do YouTube? Should I do podcasting? So that's why I'm using that as a barometer. But that is totally comparing apples to oranges. But there's a lot of distractibility on other platforms, right? It's like, ooh, this video, ooh, suggested video, ooh. You don't have that on podcasting. So from that standpoint, people really get to know who you authentically are, and they tend to stick around a lot longer than they do with other modalities, other mediums when it comes to content. All right, so the last one is it's fun. It really is fun, and it's long form, right? And so it's not uncommon. Like I could talk for an hour on this subject. I really could, but here's the deal. On YouTube, that's really not, the sweet spot's like 15 minutes, right? Like people, you're really gonna lose them if you go too long. Now, there's some exceptions to that rule. Obviously, Joe Rogan is the most notable with his 3-hour-long conversations, but think about it. He's also on podcasts. It started as a podcast. It is a podcast. He just has the video version uploaded to YouTube as well. He very much breaks a lot of rules that many people can't get away with, all right? At least not right now. It's not necessarily the norm. But with podcasting, you really have a chance to get into the nitty gritty. You really can get down and kind of convey your message, which ties back into the nurture stuff, right? So I might have to stay really kind of high level and get to the point on YouTube, but on the podcast, I can take my time a little bit more. So there's less pressure. On YouTube, sometimes I feel a little bit rushed, right? Or other content modalities, I feel like I have to get to the point because there's all these other distractions in place. But on the podcast, if I know I got you there, I kind of know the average you're going to hang around for is at least 25 minutes, right? So I think ours is like 53% of the content is our average, and our average podcast episode is like just under 50 minutes. That's a long time for somebody to hang around, and we get quite a bit of downloads. So it gives you the chance to kind of convey a message in more long form. It's more relaxing. It's more casual. You can kind of kick back. You don't have to worry about being on camera and looking all fancy and this and that, whatever. You can do it in your underwear, right, if you wanted to. So from that standpoint, it really is awesome, and it's a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed my podcast. I would not trade it for anything. I know I talked, necessarily I'm going to get into the cons, but I would have 100% gone back and done things exactly the same and done my podcast. We've had tremendous success with it, and it has absolutely leveled my brand up in ways that I thought were previously unimaginable. Let's get into the cons. Number one, and this is, I don't get it. I don't know why they don't fix this. It makes no sense to me at all. But the search for podcasting is terrible. And the reason being is because unless you are a somebody, and that's not to say you're not a somebody, because I love you and you're absolutely a somebody in this world, but unless you have brand recognition, or you are a celebrity, or you, for whatever reason, already have a big audience elsewhere, like a big social media following that you can kind of funnel into what you're already doing, or you built a big YouTube channel, and now you want to add the podcast so people can download that as well, not dissimilar to what I'm doing right now, right? Actually, I did the opposite, so I'm actually building my YouTube channel from the podcast. I maybe would have done it differently, but again, whatever, ifs and buts, right? So the search with most podcasts, and that's starting to change a little bit, but it's pretty much, I search for names that I'm looking for, right? So for example, if you found this video version of what you're listening to, you probably searched in something like the pros and cons of podcasting, and you found this video, right? When you use podcasting, you search for people you know, not inquiries that you have, right? You're not using it like Google or like YouTube, in that you're not putting in, how do I do this, right? How do I fix my car? How do I grow a business? You're literally searching for people you know, or you're going to the top charts, which are basically all of the, pretty much the people that I just mentioned, people that are more notable, that people, so I'm not saying it's solely a celebrity platform, because it's absolutely not, and you absolutely can grow. It's just a little bit harder without having that search, right? If I can take advantage and I can hack things on YouTube and take advantage of some of those growth strategies on YouTube, or even my blog is fantastic. I've used my blog to actually grow my podcast because it does take advantage of search. You Google for a topic, you look for my podcast, or you look for my blog, or you see an article that I wrote, you find my podcast embedded in that blog, which introduces you to my podcast, right? So we've had to use other mediums to bring awareness to our podcast, because once we were no longer trending, we started our show trending under New and Noteworthy, under Business, Health, and Education, top 5 for like 8 straight weeks. We built a massive audience with that exposure. But what we saw is that as we exited that first 8 weeks of New and Noteworthy status, we started to see those numbers kind of dwindle until we started building Twitter, building Instagram, writing the blogs that coincide with the podcast. So we had to take advantage and kind of hack other search mediums to bring awareness to the podcast, or else you're just kind of, a lot of people, they launch a podcast and they do 125 shows and they're just basically yelling down a hallway. There's nothing you can do on that medium to rank your content higher than anybody else's, right? And other than just hopefully get into the top 150 or top 200 podcast overall, right? And how you do that is anybody's guess, right? It's anybody's guess. Nobody really knows. That's not clear. It's kind of like Google. They don't tell you exactly what to do. But at least with Google and YouTube, you have tools that kind of push you in the right direction. Podcasting doesn't exist at all. There's nothing out there that tells you this is what you should do. So it's really anybody's guess. Some of the gurus say one thing and then others say other things. So from a search standpoint, if you're starting out from scratch, that's really, really tough. If you're trying to build an audience from scratch, it's really hard to do it without search. That's my number one complaint, and I have no idea why they haven't changed it. Now, before we move to the second one, let me tell you this. There has been some rumblings of that potentially going to change. Castbox, I had the founder, I'm going to actually link that below. You can listen to that. That was before I was doing YouTube, so I don't have the video version of that, but I'll link it below. The founder of Castbox, I don't recall her name at this moment, so I apologize to her. But anyways, she told me that one of the things that's coming is that effectively their algorithms, or I don't know if it's a form of AI or what it is going to entail, but effectively what they do is it's going to provide it's basically just transcriptions is really all it is. It's probably didn't need AI to do this, but basically it's going to be able to listen to what you say, create a transcript effectively that their system can use to figure out what content you talk about, and then give that to other people and reteach them how to look for certain topics like you would for a Google search or like you would for a YouTube search on podcasting. Hasn't happened yet. We'll see. I know it's in the works, and we'll see if Apple picks up on that. Apple really kind of doesn't take podcasting very seriously, but there are some people that have started to do that. Google Play, Spotify, they're all really starting to pick up. Spotify really has made it kind of a central focus, honestly. They're really doubling down on podcasting. Pandora's jumped in the mix. So I think, a rising tide will raise all ships, and hopefully that's the case. Hopefully we see some innovation. Right now, my understanding is that podcast is one of the slowest growing mediums, right? So content mediums. So that doesn't bode well. That really is tough, and there's a lot of attrition. Right? Most people don't get past, I don't recall the actual specific number. I think it was something like 83% of people don't get past, they pod fade before 10 or 20 episodes. That's a significant amount of people. So that basically means you're submitting and you're just done after 10 or 20 episodes. I don't know what those statistics looks like for YouTube, so it might not be different from other content modalities, but I do know this. People get frustrated because it just seems like they can't go anywhere with it, and they don't know what to do about it, so it's very frustrating. All right, number two is kind of ties in number one. Analytics are just almost non-existent. At least with a blog, you can go to Google Analytics and you can be like, okay, these are the things that are resonating with people. This is what people like. This is what they're doing. There's other tools like Hotjar where you can actually look and see how people are interacting on your website. You can see how long they stayed there, all the various things. You can do those things with podcasting. You can see where they came from. You can see, how many downloads you have, things of that nature, and you can actually see how many people, how long they stay, but the deep dive metrics are not there like they are for other platforms. If you look at the tools, right, for YouTube creators, it's unbelievable the amount of data that they give you. Nobody does search analytics better than Google, period. Nobody, right? So with blogging, with Google, with YouTube, you get all of those things. You get really deep dive metrics, right? And with podcasting, you kind of get a little bit, but it's even hard. Like even on your, whatever host you have, it's even hard to see how many subscribers you have across all of the various podcast players. Like, how are we still not doing that and making it just like, hey, this is how many subscribers you have, right? So it's very, very challenging. It's very, very frustrating. And in that standpoint, it kind of feels futile sometimes. You're kind of like, why am I doing all this work if I don't even know what's actually going on? It's really hard for me to read. I do look at my analytics from a standpoint. I look in my Libsyn account and I'll see, okay, clearly I can see the downloads are strong for these various topics, and I tend to do more of those topics, right? I can analyze them, but it's a very, very small degree in relation to the ones that I can with other platforms and just the abilities that those have. All right, number three. We talked about this before, but it's terrible for CTAs, right? So I mentioned before, click-through rate. CTR is click-through rate. CTA is call to action, right? So if I have something and I say, hey, I've got a free download, or I mentioned before, I have a blog. Go check out the blog on how to get your podcast off the ground. We can look at it and see with our Google Analytics where those things are coming from, right? Where those clicks are coming from. Even though we have a very small audience on YouTube compared to the podcast, we see a lot of CTAs. We're seeing a lot of movement from the YouTube channel. So it's really, 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 I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on this because we already talked about it, but it's really terrible for CTAs. And that is if you're trying to build a business, that makes it very, very difficult if you can't get people to come at least to your website or do anything, right? Because how you can make money, right? So podcasting, number 4, podcasting should not be used as the main driver for your business. That all said, I would say the exact same thing about YouTube, right? I would say the exact same things about most content modalities. It shouldn't be Instagram as well. None of these platforms should be your main means or your main driver of income, period, right? You need to use them to grow a business, not to be your business, right? So a lot of people rely on the advertisement dollars that they're going to make from these various platforms, right? And whether it's on YouTube, which is like, I think it's $2 for every 1,000 downloads, or every 1,000 views, I should say. And on the podcast, I think it's like 15 to 25 for every 1,000. If you're going to go the strict, traditional advertising route, that's a lot of downloads, right? Like for most people, that's a lot of downloads. And I don't think they're going to experience enough. Maybe at some point they get to making $75 an episode. I mean, that's just not enough, right? So a lot of people always talk to me about, oh, how do I get sponsors? How do I do this? How do I do that? And like, I haven't seen sponsors really make that transition to understanding new media, digital media, and investing in the ways that they still do in traditional media, right? And so I think that's slowly happening. I really do. But a lot of the opportunities that I've personally seen are through affiliates, and then it goes back to the CTA issue, right? I can talk about Uber till I'm blue in the face. I can talk about Onnit till I'm blue in the face. But if you don't use my special promo link, they don't even know, right? They don't even know that it came from me, and it doesn't really help me that much, right? And so we've used affiliates in a lot of other ways, right? Built into our products that we sell or on YouTube, right? We can include the link right there. You just click over, boom. People are used to the YouTube descriptions, and that helps a lot more. So you just really can't build a business around it. There's just not enough money in it to do that. And I think that's why a lot of people end up pod fading, is that they're just like, I'm not making any money. I'm not going to keep doing this, right? So I totally get that. I would say be patient. I would say continue to work on it. And I would say make sure it's a part of your holistic marketing approach, not your only marketing approach. All right, so guys, that's it for this video. Make sure to drop down, check out all the links below, including that blog that I mentioned. I also have a free download for you about podcasting specifically you can take with you. And it's about getting off the ground and some of the recommendations that I have for you. So check out that link below. Make sure to like, subscribe, and check out the podcast, right? I said this is an Entrepreneur podcast and Entrepreneur TV. Make sure to check out both. Like, subscribe, share it with a friend, and I'll see you guys in the next one.